Preparing for an advisory associate at PwC interview? You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 20 key questions you're likely to face. For each question, you'll see a sample answer, followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. Why do you want to join PwC Advisory as an associate? I see PwC Advisory as the part of the firm that helps clients solve complex business problems, from deals and transformation to risk and technology. What attracts me is the mix of analytical work and client exposure. As an associate, I'd expect to build models, research industries, prepare client-ready materials, and support senior consultants. I'm drawn to PwC because the work combines credibility, training, and practical impact for clients. While answering, focus on PwC's advisory platform, client impact, structured training, teamwork, and your interest in solving business problems through analysis, communication, and practical recommendations. Question 2. Walk me through your resume and explain how your experience fits PwC Advisory. My background has prepared me for advisory through a combination of analytical and team-based experiences. In school, I built a strong finance and accounting foundation, then applied it through projects involving Excel analysis, market research, and presentations. In my internship, I learned how to manage deadlines, ask better questions, and communicate findings clearly. Those experiences fit PwC Advisory because the role requires structured thinking, attention to detail, and the ability to turn analysis into useful recommendations. Make sure to cover your education, internships, analytical projects, leadership examples, and transferable skills. Connect each experience to advisory work, problem-solving, teamwork, financial analysis, communication, and client service. Question 3. How would you explain the difference between PwC Advisory, assurance, and tax? Assurance primarily gives stakeholders confidence in financial reporting, usually through audits. Tax helps clients manage tax compliance, planning, and structuring. Advisory is broader consulting work focused on business challenges, such as improving operations, managing risk, supporting transactions, or implementing technology. The mindset is slightly different. Advisory teams diagnose problems, build recommendations, and help clients execute change. All three require technical skill and trust, but advisory is more project and solution-oriented. In your answer, talk about the core purpose of each service line. Emphasize that advisory is project-based consulting focused on improving performance, managing risk, executing deals, and enabling transformation. Question 4. Tell me about a time you worked on a team under a tight deadline. In a finance project, my team had 3 days to complete a valuation presentation after our data assumptions changed. I took responsibility for rebuilding the comparable company analysis and created a checklist so we could track remaining work. We divided tasks by strength, held short check-ins, and reviewed each other's outputs before submission. We finished on time and received strong feedback for clarity. The experience taught me that structure and communication matter most under pressure. Be sure to mention the situation, your role, the deadline pressure, how you organize tasks, communicated with teammates, and what measurable or practical result the team achieved. Question 5. How would you approach a client problem when the facts are incomplete or ambiguous? I would start by clarifying the client's objective and defining what decision they need to make. Then I'd break the issue into key work streams, such as financial impact, operational drivers, risks, and stakeholder constraints. If data were incomplete, I'd make clear assumptions and validate them with available evidence. I'd also flag uncertainty rather than hide it. The goal is not to wait for perfect information, but to create a structured path toward a defensible recommendation. While answering, focus on structuring ambiguity. Explain how you would define the objective, identify key questions, make reasonable assumptions, gather data, test hypotheses, and communicate uncertainty transparently. Question 6. What do you know about the PwC Professional Framework? The PwC Professional Framework describes the capabilities PwC expects its people to build. For an associate, I interpret it as bringing ownership, business curiosity, technical strength, inclusive teamwork, and strong relationship skills to every engagement. Whole leadership means being accountable, even in junior tasks. Business acumen means understanding the client's context. Technical and digital means using tools effectively. Relationships and inclusion matter because consulting work depends on trust, collaboration, and clear communication. Make sure to cover the main dimensions of the PwC Professional: whole leadership, business acumen, technical and digital, global and inclusive, and relationships. Question 7. Give an example of a time you analyzed data and turned it into a recommendation. In a student consulting project, we analyzed customer survey and sales data for a small retailer. I cleaned the data in Excel, segmented customers by purchase frequency, and compared margins across product categories. We found that repeat customers were buying lower margin items, while newer customers responded strongly to bundled offers. I recommended targeted promotions for higher margin bundles. The client adopted part of our recommendation, and the project showed me how analysis becomes valuable only when it drives action. In your answer, describe the dataset, the analysis performed, the insight you found, and the recommendation made. Highlight Excel, visualization, assumptions, and how your analysis supported a decision. Question 8. How would you evaluate whether a company should enter a new market? I'd evaluate market entry through 3 lenses: attractiveness, ability to win, and economics. First, I'd size the market, assess growth, customer needs, regulation, and competitive intensity. Second, I'd examine whether the company has the brand, capabilities, distribution, and talent to compete. Third, I'd model investment needs, revenue potential, margins, and payback period. If the market is attractive but execution risk is high, I might recommend a pilot, partnership, or phased entry. Be sure to mention market size, growth, competition, customer demand, regulatory issues, capabilities, investment required, risks, and expected returns. Structure your answer like a consulting case response. Question 9. A client's costs have increased by 15% while revenue is flat. How would you diagnose the issue? I'd first break the 15% increase into major cost categories: labor, materials, technology, rent, logistics, and SG&A. Then I'd compare each category against revenue, volume, headcount, and historical trends. If revenue is flat, I'd look for vendor price increases, overtime, inefficient processes, or one-time expenses. I'd also benchmark against peers where possible. After identifying the main drivers, I'd prioritize recommendations based on savings potential, implementation difficulty, and impact on client operations. While answering, focus on separating fixed versus variable costs, identifying cost categories, comparing against prior periods and benchmarks, checking volume, pricing, labor, vendor, and process efficiency drivers. Question 10. What financial statements would you review first when assessing a company's performance? I would review all 3 statements together because each tells a different part of the story. The income statement shows revenue growth, margins, and profitability. The balance sheet shows liquidity, leverage, working capital, and asset intensity. The cash flow statement shows whether earnings are converting into cash. For performance assessment, I'd focus on trends, not just one period. A company can report profits, but still face issues if cash conversion or debt levels are weak. Make sure to cover the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement. Explain what each reveals and why cash flow, margins, leverage, working capital, and profitability matter. Question 11. How would you support a due diligence engagement as a PwC Advisory Associate? As an associate on due diligence, I'd support the team by organizing data room materials, building analysis in Excel, and identifying trends or red flags. For example, I might analyze revenue by customer, margin by product, working capital movements, or one-time expenses affecting EBITDA. I'd document assumptions clearly and prepare clean outputs for managers and partners. The associate role is about accuracy, curiosity, and making sure senior team members have reliable analysis for client discussions. In your answer, talk about quality of earnings, revenue trends, customer concentration, working capital, debt-like items, industry research, data room review, Excel analysis, and preparing findings for senior team members. Question 12. What is EBITDA, and why is it commonly used in advisory and deals work? EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It is often used because it approximates operating profitability before differences in capital structure, tax profile, and non-cash depreciation policies. In deals, buyers frequently value companies using EBITDA multiples, especially for comparable businesses. That said, EBITDA is not cash flow. It ignores capital expenditures, working capital needs, and debt service. So I would use it as one useful metric, not the full answer. Be sure to define EBITDA, explain its usefulness as an operating profitability proxy, mention valuation multiples, comparability, and limitations such as ignoring CapEx, working capital, taxes, and debt service. Question 13. Describe a time you received difficult feedback. How did you respond? During a presentation project, I was told my slides had strong analysis but too much detail for an executive audience. At first I thought more detail meant better work, but I realized the message was getting buried. I asked for examples of stronger slides, revised the deck around key takeaways, and moved supporting detail to the appendix. My next presentation was clearer and more persuasive. That feedback changed how I think about client communication. While answering, focus on maturity, openness, self-awareness, and improvement. Explain what the feedback was, how you acted on it, and how your performance changed afterward. Question 14. How do you prioritize tasks when multiple managers give you work at the same time? I would first clarify each task's deadline, expected output, and level of urgency. Then I'd create a simple priority list based on client impact and timing. If two deadlines conflict, I would communicate early rather than silently risk missing one. I'd ask the managers to help align priorities if needed. I also try to build in review time, because speed without accuracy can create rework. Transparency is key when several people depend on your output. Make sure to cover communication, deadline clarification, urgency versus importance, transparency, quality control, and escalation when needed. Show that you can manage workload professionally without overpromising. Question 15. What role does PowerPoint play in advisory work, and how do you create an effective client slide? PowerPoint is important because advisory teams often communicate recommendations through client decks. A strong slide should have a clear message title, simple structure, accurate data, and a visual that supports the takeaway. I avoid making slides look like spreadsheets pasted into a deck. Instead, I focus on what decision the client needs to make and what evidence supports it. Good slides are not just attractive, they make complex analysis easier to understand. In your answer, talk about communication, executive-level storytelling, clear titles, charts, concise messaging, source support, visual structure, and translating detailed analysis into decision-ready recommendations. Question 16. How would you identify and communicate a risk or control weakness to a client? I would first understand the process and compare the actual control activity against the expected standard. If I identified a weakness, I'd gather evidence, assess the root cause, and evaluate the risk impact. When communicating to the client, I'd avoid sounding accusatory. I'd explain the issue, why it matters, and what could happen if it remains unresolved. Then I'd suggest practical remediation steps, such as clearer ownership, stronger review procedures, or better system access controls. Be sure to mention understanding the process, testing evidence, identifying the root cause, assessing likelihood and impact, documenting clearly, and communicating constructively with practical remediation options. Question 17. Tell me about a time you had to influence someone without formal authority. In a group project, one teammate wanted to divide work quickly without aligning on the final storyline. I was not the team leader, but I suggested we spend 20 minutes agreeing on the main recommendation first. I showed how misalignment could create rework later. By framing it around saving time, not criticizing the plan, I got the group on board. We produced a more coherent presentation and finished earlier because everyone understood the end goal. While answering, focus on relationship building, listening, evidence-based persuasion, adapting your message, and achieving alignment. Use a clear example where you changed a decision or improved collaboration. Question 18. What would you do if you found an error in a client deliverable shortly before submission? I would first verify the error quickly to make sure I understand its cause and impact. Then I'd alert the appropriate senior team member immediately, rather than trying to fix it quietly if timing is tight. If it is material, the team needs to correct it before submission or inform the client appropriately. I'd help revise the analysis and check related outputs. Afterward, I'd identify why the error happened and improve my review process. Make sure to cover ownership, urgency, fact-checking, notifying the team, assessing materiality, correcting the issue, preventing recurrence, and maintaining professional integrity under pressure. Question 19. How do PwC's values show up in day-to-day advisory work? PwC's values are practical in advisory work. Acting with integrity means being honest about findings and limitations. Making a difference means focusing on recommendations that help the client, not just producing analysis. Caring and working together matter because projects can be demanding, and teams perform better when people communicate and support each other. Reimagining possible means looking for better ways to solve problems, whether through data, technology, or a more effective operating model. In your answer, mention PwC values such as act with integrity, make a difference, care, work together, and reimagine possible. Connect them to client service and team behavior. Question 20. Do you have any questions for us about PwC Advisory? Yes, I'd ask questions that show genuine interest in the role. For example, I might ask what types of projects first-year associates typically support, how teams balance technical analysis with client interaction, and what differentiates high-performing associates at PwC. I'd also ask how feedback and coaching work during engagements. Strong questions should help me understand the day-to-day role, while showing that I'm already thinking about how to contribute effectively. Be sure to ask thoughtful questions about project types, associate responsibilities, training, team culture, feedback, digital tools, industry exposure, or how success is measured in the first year. If you are still with us, congratulations, you are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.